All right, day 11 of distance learning. So we are talking about the immune system. We're going to continue talking about lines of defense, but look a little bit more specific as to what is in each line, okay? So after today's lesson, you should be able to identify one component from each of the defenses, like one thing that is always in the first, second, or third line, define what an antigen is, and explain the role of fever as it relates to the inflammatory system and how it actually helps us stay healthy. So various points of entry, just to kind of recap a few things. Your digestive system, right? You eat something, it's not good. Your respiratory system, you breathe in a pathogen from that way. The urogenital tract, right? If that's the case, and potentially even breaks in the skin, right? Because then it can enter through the bloodstream. So the circulatory system and the lymphatic system are where we see that the most. We haven't talked about the lymphatic system at all this year, so I'm just going to give you a really brief touch on what that is. You don't have to stress too much about that. But basically, the lymphatic system is a series of glands that are around your body, and they impact everything in your body. So things can easily move in and out from there, okay? All right, so your first line of defense, again, we want to talk about that skin and mucous membrane. So we know that sweat should have a pH of between 3 to 5, which is pretty acidic. Tears have this washing action. So any pathogen or foreign particle that's trying to get in, we try to get it away through that. Mucus, again, is going to trap any of those microbes. And again, saliva does have an antibacterial property. That's why if you look at animals, if they're injured, they do tend to lick themselves. It's something that's innate within them. Sometimes I see humans do that. Let's try not to do that because we have other things that can help us, okay? And antimicrobial proteins, we talked a bit about stomach acid before as well. So these are just some first line. Again, these are general. You are born with these. They attack everything equally. They're not very specific. So your second line, it's a broader range of control. So we have things like mast cells, monocytes, macrophages, natural killer cells. Those are all types of leukocytes, right? And so we know that this is innate. We know that they're going around the body and they're looking for anyone who's come in and gotten through that first line of defense. Okay, and I gave us some leukocytes on the back. So there's some that are phagocytic. I'm going to talk about the process of phagocytosis, which is really when one cell, a phagocyte, engulfs and eats another cell that's not supposed to be there. So just hold on that one. And a white blood cell is an example. And there's also some antimicrobial proteins. So here you can see a phagocyte. So you see a macrophage over here, and it's engulfing yeast. When I say engulfing, it's the correct way of saying eating. A macrophage doesn't have a mouth. It can't actually eat, but it can actually surround it with its cellular material. If you look on the right side over here, this purple thing is a macrophage. What you see are these microbes. So these little purple things over here, the little ovals, aren't supposed to be there. So those will get engulfed. This is the cell wall. It will kind of go around it. It will create this little vacuole or like an envelope to hold them so that they can't put their DNA in us as a macrophage. We're going to join with something called a lysosome, which has enzymatic proteins, which are just meant to digest or dissolve anything that was getting us sick. So in this case, it's those little purple microbes. Once we dissolve those microbes, we will release their parts, and their parts will get recycled and expelled, and they'll get out of us because we broke it down, right? So it doesn't have the instructions to attack us. So phagocytosis is actually a pretty important process. All right, so the inflammatory response, just kind of going back to what we look at that, we know that there could potentially be some bacteria. This is going to trigger that chemical alarm signal. You should remember the chemical signal that's going to be triggered is histamine, right? So we'll trigger that production of histamine, and what that will cause is that will cause these phagocytes, right? As you can see, these to go in that area and to just do that process of phagocytosis that I showed you to try and engulf all that bacteria and get rid of it. Now, this is a lot of information about a fever, and this actually gives you the step-by-step of how a fever occurs in the body. But I want to tell you something about why fevers are so important. In the inflammatory response, let's say you get that, you get that splinter and you get all that bacteria or something in your body. For some reason, let's say phagocytosis doesn't cut it, or there was just so much bacteria and those phagocytes couldn't get it. The fever helps you break down that protein. It causes that protein to become denatured, right? And so anything that when you have a fever, it's usually an indicator that your body is fighting some sort of infection. It might not be a major thing, right? But that's really what it does. And so in that sense, the fever helps kill those foreign particles. It also causes other things like the repair of tissue, and it stimulates more phagocytosis. So it's helping phagocytosis happen more rapidly. So there are things here that suggest that a fever is a good thing. Obviously, you don't want that fever to get too high, but a mild fever does help keep our bodies healthy. All right, so let's look at the third line. So this is acquired or active immunity. Remember, these are specific defenses. So we are only going to focus on B cells and T cells. Okay, and I'll talk to you about the difference. We're also going to talk about antibodies a little bit. Don't worry about immunoglobulins. Okay, so these B cells and T cells, the B cells primarily, are going to help us produce antibodies. Antibodies we're going to talk about in the next lesson, but they are really what makes our immune system strong or not, right? An antigen, just think about an antigen, it's like a little ID badge. So your cells all have specific markers so that your body knows that they're your cells. My body has my own little markers so they know that they're my cells. So let's say another cell, let's say, I don't know, something comes in, a pathogen, they're going to have different markers. They're going to have a different ID badge. And so we're going to make antibodies to respond and to kill those ID badges that aren't supposed to be there. Okay. All right. So again, an antigen, just a little name tag. I call it an ID badge because I think like you have to have a badge to get into a certain place sometimes. And so we're going to get that. So in this example that I gave you here, like this is supposed to be a self cell. So it has this marker. This is a non-self or a foreign cell, right? So it has a different kind of marker. And then we would respond to that because we know that it's not supposed to be there. This is why if we talk about things like transplants, like organ transplants or tissue transplants, that's why they have to check to see if you're a match. It's not only based on your blood type, it's based on tissue type too, and it's looking also at those antigens, those little markers on the outside. And that should do it. So I look forward to seeing you all later this week. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Be safe, be smart, be brilliant as always.